is Edward Earl. Back. I know I haven't been here in a while. I haven't been putting out a lot of content, but in this new year, we want to put out a lot more content. Want to be a lot more consistent. Right now, we're going through, my wife and I, and along with our church, we're going through a 21-day fast. So, ministry and community and building has been a key point through the fast, praying and fasting about. And so that's what it's going to look like this year in terms of putting out more content, doing more debates this year, having on some guests this year, maybe doing some podcasts this year. And so all of that's on the table. I just ask you, the viewers, to go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and share, support the channel. That's going to get us more visibility, so that way we could have more success as a channel. So I'm asking that of you, and what I'm giving you in return is going to be some good content. And so stay tuned for what we have in store. So, I am going to introduce Shelby Bower. Am I pronouncing your last name right? Bower?
That is correct.
Bower. Okay, very good. So, Shelby, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am currently going to school to get my master's in apologetics and cosmogony. My goal is to develop a curriculum for high school students from 9th to 12th grade for an apologetics curriculum that includes ethics, morality, cosmogony, all the things wrapped up. And so, I'm trying to kind of dip my toes in the water and, talk to more people that have far more knowledge about this than I do, and just really kind of get a foundation of what I'm looking at to teach. And so I really appreciate you having me on so that, we can discuss, and hopefully you can give me a lot of insight of what I need to prepare for so that I can teach. So.
Okay. So we're going to jump into the topic of morality. A huge part of a worldview, any worldview, you have to explain morality. You have to kind of like show how it's grounded, if it's grounded. We have such thing as, from a Christian standpoint, we have such thing as the moral law, the moral argument for God. Are you familiar with that? The moral
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a good start, to start there and then build on top of that in terms of our conversation. So, because I think that a lot of skeptical conversations and debates begin at that point where they're basically looking to refute the argument. Okay, they're looking to refute the moral argument. And so you'll hear different responses. What were you going to say?
I don't know if you noticed, but I've noticed that it begins with the moral argument and it also ends with the moral argument. And so, you tunnel down this funnel where ultimately you get to, okay, well, if there is a God, is it a good God? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's interesting that, a lot of people begin with it, but then, you go around it and it funnels down to the same point: is where is morality rooted in, and is God good?
Right. That's a good point. Because if they concede, and then, the other side of that is, if they do concede that there is a God, then all of a sudden they're not arguing for atheism anymore. They're basically arguing for, well, which version of theism? Okay. And I feel like once you get to that point, then you actually have made progress. Once you get to the point where, okay, well, I accept theism. Okay, so now let's try to figure out, which version that we're talking about. And so it's a good thing to get to that point. But to be honest with you, in my experiences, like I haven't, experienced a lot of atheists get to that point. They're fighting tooth and nail on the first couple of points. And so, so let's go ahead and start there. So the moral argument, and I kind of like William Lane Craig's version of the moral argument, and I know there's different versions of the argument, but his first premise starts like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Okay. And then it goes on to, well, objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Okay. And then a skeptic will, make arguments against the first premise or make arguments against the second premise. They say, well, hold on. There is a such thing as objective moral values, but they're not grounded in God. They're grounded in Plato's forms or something of the sort. So you have objective moral values and duties, but they're not grounded in God. So that's one version that the atheist will come with. And then the other version is, well, there's no such thing as objective. There are no objective moral values and duties, right? There's no objective morality at all. It's all subjective. Okay, so kind of you have those two different sides.
Have you noticed that, there will also be those people that come out and say, that's not true because I'm a good person and I don't believe in God. So they're using an objective morality in order to prove that God doesn't exist. I don't need God in order to be a good person, so therefore that claim is false. Not understanding that the premise isn't you need to know God in order to have morality or to be a good person. It's there cannot be an objective good or standard in which you go by without a God himself. You don't need to acknowledge God in order for that to be true.
Right.
But in order for that to be true, there needs to be a God.
Right. That's a totally great point. I hear that a lot as well. But I could be, I do this, I do that, I give charity, and so I don't believe in God. And so therefore, this premise is not true. But yeah, it totally misses the point on the whole premise. It's not talking about, objective morality after God. It's saying, what's the foundation of it, right? How do you get that you say you have? Right. And so, yeah, they totally confused the argument there. Do you want to say anything about because I'm actually, the topic tonight, I don't want to talk necessarily about those who say that there is an objective morality, right? Because you do have that side of the, atheists that will say, well, yeah, there's an objective morality. Like, in other words, there's certain things that are really bad. There are certain things that are really evil. And it's some Platonism forms, right? So we're not going to really deal with that side tonight. I want to deal with the other side of the spectrum that says, well, wait a minute, there's no objective morality at all. Okay, so all we have is subjective. All we have is, what we feel, what we've come to agree upon as a community, or something of the sort. What do you think on that?
I think a lot of people will pre-assume that they are good. And I think that's a good point to start at, is when someone says, I'm a good person. I think to go from that and ask, well, according to who? What makes you good? And then, because most people, that you discuss that's the thing about objective morality, is that everyone has it. It's intrinsic, and everyone is without fault to know what that is. Whether or not they choose to follow it is a different thing, but everyone knows some sense of objective morality. They know that killing babies is wrong, that crashing planes into buildings is wrong. There is a sense that people know, and so people will allude to, well, I'm a good person, because they know, they have intrinsic motivation and intrinsic knowledge that there is such thing as good and bad, and they will allude to that. Well, I am a good person, I do good things. And so I think a really good point to point at, and I guess just to let, I guess to give people an idea of where to press, would be when people start using objective claims of, well, I'm a good person, and to point at that, well, okay, according to what? Who tells you you're good? And then you can go down the cultural rabbit hole. You could, you can go down the historical rabbit hole with Hitler. And, if they're in the United States, you can say, well, do you wear a hijab? If they're female, if they say no, well, according, if you were in a Muslim country, you wouldn't be a good person. So what makes you a good person? So pressing that point, I think, would be the most effective way, not to tear down someone, but to point out their own logical fallacy in what they're saying, and to show that they really do believe in this objective truth. They're using objective truth claims to say that there is no objective truth, and to show them that that is what they are doing.
Right. And I think along that same line is where maybe they will take make an attack against the Bible and say, well, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. And, to your point, and, similar to them saying, well, I'm a good person, is they're saying that this is a bad thing. This passage, the fact that they did this, or God did that, or God kills people, or, allowing suffering or evil in the world, like they'll say, well, this is bad. Okay. And again, it's almost as if they're talking out of both sides of their mouth, because on one side, they're saying, well, there's no objective morality. But then on the other side, they're saying, well, this is wrong. This is evil. And it's just a matter of, well, how do you balance those two sides? How do they balance those two sides? And I've heard different responses in trying to balance those two sides, where, to make it sound like it's not a contradiction. It really is a contradiction, but in order to try and to make it seem like, well, it's not a contradiction, they'll, have a couple of different responses. And I want to look at some of those responses and, see if you've heard some of them, maybe you have in dialoguing with different people, or even what are your thoughts on some of the responses?
And on top of those responses, before I forget, will you show me those responses along with how would you question it? Because I feel like truth can be pointed at through a series of questioning. And so with those responses, kind of showing me how you would press with questions in order to get to that realization of the claim that they're truly making.
Okay. All right. So one of the responses out here is, that is grounded in evolution. Okay. There's no objective morality, but it's grounded in our DNA. It's a way that we can survive. It's a way that we've adapted these behaviors so we can survive as a species. Okay. And so that's the extent of it. Okay. That's the extent of it. It's driven by our biological need to survive. And that's the whole story. Basically that's the whole story. It helps us to survive, and that's what makes it, that's what drives this behavior. That's what even makes me make this argument, because it's something that's designed to help me to survive. Okay. So my response to something like that, and, and I know you want to know, like, so the questions that lead up to it is kind of like, and I mentioned this to you in our prep, the naturalistic fallacy, okay, where, because, just to take a quick step back, is when we talk about morality, there's really two parts to it, okay, and the argument that I put forth, it actually deals with both of those parts: the value of the moral value and the moral duty. Okay, so it's the value part of morality, and then it's the normativity of morality. So the ought or the should, right? The prescription, the thing that we ought to do this, or we ought to do that, or we ought not to do this, or we ought not to do that. That's the part that is missing when someone makes this statement. When someone says something like, "Well, it's grounded in evolution." Well, okay, that's only the descriptive part of it. To say, let's just hypothetically say that there's a gene. They've identified a gene that codes for morality. Okay, let's just say that they code. There's a gene that codes for morality. Okay, and so that will only deal with the moral value part. Okay, like what we think is right or what we think is good. Okay, what we think is something that's going to help us to survive, right? It doesn't talk to us about, well, why ought we do that? Like what's compelling me to actually do it? There's nothing that's compelling me to do it. Like, I'm gonna give an example. Like, animals do certain things to survive, right? They kill each other to survive. They rape each other to survive. They steal each other's food to survive. They eat each other to survive. Okay, that helps them to survive. So what's the difference on our side? Like, if it's all about survival, then why not do all of these things? Why not kill each other and eat each other and rape each other and all of these things? Like, why is there a should, in quotes, a should or an ought that we ought not do those things, right? So that's what I'm saying. The genetics doesn't speak to that. If I were to accept that, the argument's like, if I were to accept that, it doesn't deal with that ought. It just deals with the is part of it, the descriptive part of it, not the prescriptive part of it. And so that's something that I have brought up, in my conversations, because I engage with skeptics a lot of time. I kind of took a break over the last month and a half, but normally I'm engaging with skeptics like on a daily basis, and so I've dealt with that particular side of the equation. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, you brought up two really good points. One about, where is that ought from evolution coming from, and how do we make sense of all these instincts that we have, and that there's some that we should do over another. And so it's really interesting that you brought up that a lot of people you engage with talk about evolution pointing to the I guess essentially the preservation of human life. That because it is instinct to survive, that is where all morality is derived from. It's from evolution, that is preservation of human life, and then that's kind of the umbrella, and then everything under that supports it is morality. And I feel like I would question that. I would ask, okay, so if your moral presupposition is anything that preserves the human life, I would ask, why is that good? Why is human survival a good thing? Because you're saying that is the moral standard of goodness, is preservation of human life. And it contradicts itself. And so pressing that question, okay, why is that a good thing? Why is that preservation of human life, what you call, or what you're saying evolution is responsible for, why is that a good thing? And give it a minute, because evolution can't explain, if we're really just a bunch of chemicals and neurons floating around kind of bumping into each other, not even the preservation of human life would be above anything else. So the fact that we are instinctually grounded to value human life, which if the atheistic claim is, well, evolution, survival. What they're really is saying is there is intrinsic value for every person to be alive. And it's getting lost in, well, evolution just, survival. It's that presupposition is so much deeper than that. And being the point, I'm like, okay, so yes, there is intrinsic value in people and the need to preserve human life. Why is that good? Above all else, why is that good?
Why is that good? But also, where did it come from?
Yes.
Right? Like, where did this in a naturalistic universe, okay, where there's no purpose or design, where does this human value come from? Like, is it part of the furniture in the cosmos? Is it part of what actually exists? Okay, and if it's not, then why are they pointing to it as if it is something? Okay, so it's kind of like, again, it's talking out of both sides of the mouth. Like, okay, so you're identifying this, even though they didn't say it, you brought it up. You actually pulled it out as a presupposition that they hold, that there is human value. Okay, it's good because they're not going to admit that, but it's good that you brought that out. Like, yeah. So you are valuing human dignity. Where did this come from? Okay, if there's a designer, if there's a creator that actually, as the scriptures tell us, God created man in his image. God has given us human dignity, right? He's given us his image, okay, that we have, and we have human dignity. That's where it comes from. Okay, so the Christian worldview can explain that, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't know if you've ever read Stealing from God from Frank Turek, but he talks about that, stealing from God. Like, that's, they're stealing that. They're stealing that human dignity. That's not part of their worldview. They're totally stealing it. Because according to the evolution of your worldview, we're nothing but, like you said, chemicals, animals, right? We're just an ape, right? We're an ape like everyone else, like every other animal in animal kingdom. And so where's human dignity in that?
To say that good is as a result of evolution is to say that good is relative, and then you're back at that point, and then you can start asking those other questions that show the premise of morality is not culturally confined or it's not culturally confined or linear, historically confined, but there's a path. So to say, well, evolution is responsible for goodness, well, anything can be good, anything. And then you can start asking questions on that. But it's funny that, and I have not read that book, and it's one I've been meaning to do. I have read I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Dr. Frank Turek, which is phenomenal. But he does talk about that, where atheistic pre-assumptions steal the idea of what is good in order to place terms like objective good on, well, evolution caused it. Well, that's just the way that it is. It could be no other way.
So stories, this story and that story, no evidence to back it up, but yeah, evolution did this and did that, and it caused us to do this, made men and women and all of these other things, and it's like, well, what's the evidence for all of that? It's just a story that they tell.
Anything but God, right?
Right, exactly. Even aliens. I don't know if you ever heard of Richard Dawkins. He would rather believe in aliens. Like, aliens came and they seeded life on Earth.
Any intelligent design besides someone that has moral authority over your life, right?
Right, exactly. Okay, so the next point that I hear a lot is grounded in agreement, right? And so it's kind of like, well, the reason we have morality in our society is because we have evolved enough where we come together as a society and we agree to these terms. We agree that this is right. We agree that this is wrong. You know what I'm saying? And so it's grounded in the agreement. Is it grounded in our societal agreement that we have with each other, or even as, like, let's say a couple, me and my spouse, we agree that we're going to be truthful to each other. We're gonna love each other. So everything, all of the morality is just grounded in the agreement, in the societal agreement. And I actually had a really good conversation with a guy. I mean, it was kind of one-sided, but
from him or you?
well, here's what I will say about that. Morality precedes the agreement. Okay, so if we as a society decide that murder is wrong, or we agree that murder is wrong, okay, the idea came before the agreement. Okay, the morality was already there before we came to the agreement. We agreed because morality already was there. The objective morality was already there. The good and bad was already there. The evil, we understood that it was evil before we came to the agreement. So the agreement itself presupposes morality. Okay, and so he's trying to explain. They're trying to explain morality in terms of the agreement, but morality precedes the agreement, and so it doesn't explain anything. Okay, and I hear it all the time. They'll say something like, "Oh, it's intersubjective," so it's not.
Explain a little bit about that.
Well, so it's not just one person deciding that something is right or wrong, but we've done it collectively. Okay, it's subjective, but it's not just individual. An individual subjectivity. It's a community. It's a community agreement. Okay, it's intersubjective. This is what I hear all the time. It's intersubjective. So, and I guess they want to make it sound more legitimate. Okay,
they put fancy terms to things that don't make sense.
Kind of like it's really a popularity fallacy. Because all the majority agrees, that makes it right. When in reality, that doesn't hold, because in the past the majority might have agreed on something that was wrong.
So Hitler was really right.
Say that again?
I said, according to that, Hitler was really right.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying. So, and the thing about it is, the scriptures talk about how, their eyes are blinded. And I really believe that, because when you hear some of these takes, it's like, how can you really believe that? How could you believe that it's grounded in the agreement when the morality precedes the agreement? It really doesn't make any sense to me.
You bring up a really interesting point there as well. That agreed upon values determine morality. That is a presupposition that a lot of people have. Well, if it's agreed upon, then therefore it must be moral. And I don't think that they have truly taken into account what that means. It sounds good. It's kind of a box top. It sounds good. So the fact that they don't have to wrestle with anything that might have moral authority over their life. And I was asked a really interesting question, because I was military for 4 years and I went to civil affairs selection. And I'm not allowed to say a lot of what they did, but there was a question that they had asked us to see how we would respond. And the question was, if you were in, let's say, Saudi Arabia, and in order to gain information, you had to give over a 9-year-old girl to other authorities to trade for information. And this 9-year-old girl would be used for prostitution, but that was okay. What would you do? Would you use it for your own benefit for information? Or would you deny the information in order to preserve that 9-year-old girl from being sex trafficked? And we were actually forced to take sides. We had to talk about, would we or would we not? And we would have to kind of make that side valid depending on what we were chosen to do. And I think a really interesting thing came out of it is, asking someone, okay, well, if you were in another country where, let's say, girls as young as 6 could be married or could be trafficked, it was fine, all right? It was their cultural norms. Would you feel the need to act in opposition to cultural norms? Not even would you do it, but if you were there and you saw what was about to go down. You saw a girl about to be sold into sex trafficking. How would you feel? All right. If there was any indication or feeling to act in opposition to what that cultural norm was, then you yourself do not believe in relative morality. Because if morality really was relative, as much as ice cream flavors, I like blue, you like green, there's no need. I'm not going to feel the need to change your opinion or do anything about it if I see you picking out, mint ice cream, But if I'm overseas and I see something going down that is, in my case, wrong, and I feel the need to act upon it, that feeling itself indicates an objectiveness to morality, because you're not okay with what's about to go down. Even though it is their cultural norms, you are not okay. And that points to an objectiveness, because if it really was relative, then there would be no opposing force in your minds of, I should do something about this, because
Right.
it's all relative.
Right. And you actually bring up actually, I was going to go here next, so I'm glad you jumped ahead a little bit. So, you know what? Just like you said, here's a big problem with that line of thinking. The big problem is there's really no disagreement. Like, if morality is subjective, right, and it's based on the subject, right, it's based on the individual or the culture or whatever, then there's really no disagreement. Just like you said with the different ice creams. Like, if I say I like chocolate and you say you like vanilla, we're not disagreeing. Okay, there's no disagreement. It's you prefer that, I prefer this. There's no disagreement. And so it's the same thing with morality. If it's subjective, then they believe in sex trafficking little kids, and we don't. There's no disagreement. Okay, it's just our preferences. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes when I'm in debates and stuff like that, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why are we arguing when there's really no disagreement?
Right? Why is there a debate in the first place?
Right. The debate's already over. And since I called it, then I won, right? Like, so, yeah, like, so that the fact that there really is a disagreement refutes the position. Because if what they're saying is right, then there is no disagreement.
Okay? No one argues on a premise that is relative.
Right.
The mere fact and argumentation of itself is to pre-assume that there is truth to be found.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people understand that is the reason why we argue. That is the reason why we debate.
It refutes itself.
It does. What do they call that? There's like a self-defeating argument. Was that what you would call it?
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was thinking about that a lot. I'm like, what is the point of argumentation in the first place if there is no truth to be found? Like, what's the point?
I said that to a female I was debating before. She said she was saying that it's subjective, this and that, and I was like, well, why are we still, like I said, you're undermining, or you're betraying your true position, because if what you're saying is true, then why are you still arguing with me? Like, why are you still going on about it as if there's a disagreement here? Based on what you're saying, then there's no disagreement. And she kept going on, and I'm just like,
Let me ask you a question, because I was curious about this. Is the fact that there can be opposing sides, let me put this into words. So you were talking how she believes everything is relative. If there is two sides that have opposing ideas, does the law of non-contradiction itself eliminate the idea that truth is relative?
I think so. Yeah, I do think it's a contradiction. I do think it's a contradiction, because it's self-refuting. It destroys itself, because if truth is relative, then that means that statement itself is relative and not really true, right? It's not absolutely true. And so, yeah, it definitely goes against the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned Euthyphro dilemma a couple of days
Yes.
ago. As now, me personally, I don't hear people talk about it much. I mean, I do hear some people, when they get through the end of their argument, they'll say, "Well, how do we know that God is good?" Right? I do hear that part. But in terms of the argument itself, I think that it's been refuted for centuries now, and so I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
So this is, I went on a 2-week-long investigation on the Euthyphro dilemma just for fun, and so this is actually something I'm really excited about. But the Euthyphro dilemma was originally for, Plato is trying to ask questions about the gods with a little g. And if you, Greek gods were so flawed, and, they were subject to human error, they were sleeping with everyone, they were these very messy beings with just higher authority. And so out of that, there comes the argument, well, are the gods good because it is good? Or is the gods good because God's good because it's good? Or is the gods good because they choose it to be? Which kind of leaves you at a dilemma, all right? Is good above the gods, which means that there's an ultimate authority above the gods, or is goodness or morality relative because they just choose it to be, and therefore they can choose whether or not murder is great one day. And people will take that argument and they'll point it to a monotheistic God, and so what the argument was for was a very flawed system of gods, and pointed to, okay, well, I can take this and show how morality is arbitrary because I'm going to use that dilemma and put it to the Christian God. And so essentially you're left in a dilemma. Is there something higher above God, or does God choose it to be and it makes it arbitrary, which is a really interesting dilemma in itself. And so the way that I have learned to answer that is that good is so close to God that they cannot be separated. So good is God's nature. It is not something that is above God, nor is it something that he chooses. Good, or if you want to intermingle that with morality or pious or what you want to call it, good is as close to God as God is to good. I would even say that they are equal. There is no separation. And so I would even go as far as to say that good with a capital G is God himself, because that is his nature. And so all things on earth that are good are just aligning with God's being. And so I eventually actually came to a point where I got so far down it, I'm like, well, can then God choose not to be good? Which is another way of just saying, could God choose not to be God? And so that's
exactly what it's saying. Yep.
And I haven't quite so far figured how to rationalize myself out of that. I almost don't think it's a really relevant question in the first place. Can God choose not? Because if that's your argument for belief, can God choose not to be God, then you need to come up with a better argument. But as far as the Euthyphro dilemma, it eliminates the argument, well, there's a standard above God, so therefore God is less than, and it eliminates the argument, well, morality is arbitrary or relative because God can choose it to be any other way. And I found that argument when I was looking at best atheistic arguments against God. And it was a really good, I was wrestling with it for weeks. And to understand and kind of come to the consensus of that argument that, you know, Plato was right, I think, in the first one when he was talking about gods with a little g, is that there is a standard above the gods with a little g. And that
Right.
standard of goodness is, in fact, the monotheistic God of the Bible. And then, therefore, that authority above the little gods is God himself. So that is the standard. Right. And I think that, which is so cool, because even in a polytheistic culture, philosophers were still wrestling with the idea of objective good. It was just in a very roundabout way, but they're intrinsically wrestling with where does good come from, because the gods with a little g are not measuring up to what they intrinsically know to be good. And so you see people across cultures wrestle with these types of questions. And when you're in the face of something that is immoral or truly evil, you know that there is something, that there is a standard that which people should strive to be, even if they choose to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Yeah, you hit it out of the park on that one.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I want to just take a step back and kind of like go in a little different direction. So when we talk about morality, right? And so I like that you said the big G, the capital G, right? Because that's how I look at properties. And when I say properties, I mean things like redness, like dogness.
Explain properties to me, just so I have a good foundation of where you're coming from.
So a property is just something that is like a size or shape, a color.
So physical properties.
Yeah, physical. Well, doesn't necessarily have to be physical. And I'm going to explain, but mostly physical properties. Yes, mostly physical. But like, let's say, for instance, like morality, like evil would be a property, right? That you would apply to an event. Okay, like say, or good, right? You would apply good to, maybe an equation, right? 2 + 2 is 4. Like that answer is good. Okay, so. And so when I talk about properties, I talk about them in the same kind of way that I talk about, like you said, like the big G. Okay. And so you have the smaller properties, like the, red, that is exemplified in different objects on Earth. And then the capital R, red, which is redness, which is, from my viewpoint, is grounded in God as well. And so I think that all properties are grounded in God, not just goodness, but all properties.
So that, I'd like another term for objective truth, that there is an objective reality and an objective truth to things.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So with the fact that there is like properties and that things are what they are, is that grounded in the fact that there is indefinitely objective truth to be found and that can be knowable, like that truth can be knowable?
I would say that. Yes, I would say that. So, but I'm going somewhere with this. So, and it totally ties into this whole conversation about morality, right? Okay, so I just wanted to make that point. That's kind of like a side point, the whole properties thing, right? Because that's just giving you an insight into my mind in terms of how I look at all properties, right? You're seeing goodness. Because think about it, like if God is goodness with the capital G, and then you have goodness in other things, right? Like small g, goodness all around, right? That's exemplified.
I like that.
Right. And so I look at all properties in that sort of way. Like you have the capital, and then you have the lowercase in different instances on Earth, in our lives and stuff like that. Okay, so I said that to talk about morality in that kind of way. Like when someone says they're talking about a property of morality, like a value, a moral value, and they're applying it to a certain event. Like let's say There was a couple of really, really evil things that happened over the holidays. Actually, there was someone who got burned on fire on the subway in New York City. Someone lit the lady on fire while she slept on the subway. He lit her clothes on fire. She died. She burned to death on the train. Okay, and so when you look at something like that, now don't get me wrong. I totally believe that that's evil. Okay, so I just want to say that ahead of time. But if someone were to say, well, that was evil, what they're doing is they're applying that property evil to that situation. Okay. And so they're making a truth claim. They're making a truth claim. They're saying that this property of evil is something that actually exists, just like the property of red or the property of any other property exists. Okay. So if someone were to say that, if someone says that, then what they're saying is that that this thing is something that is objective. Okay, so when they make that statement, when they say that, and I'm gonna give an example. So let's say you say there's a tree, right? I go outside and I see a tree. There's a tree in my yard. Like, so what they're saying is the words that they're saying is something that corresponds to reality. Okay, their words corresponds to what's happening in reality. What's happening in objective reality. Okay, it corresponds, right? So if you were look at it in mathematical terms, you have something on this side of the equal sign, and then you have something else on the other side of the equal sign, and they equal each other, right? It's corresponding to what's in reality. It's true. Okay, so when they make a moral truth statement like that situation is evil, they're doing the same thing. They're making a moral statement about a state of affairs in the world. Okay, they're saying that this thing is in the world. This evil thing is in the world. Okay, and so you have to make sense of that. Okay, from an atheistic standpoint, you have to make sense of that. So we're saying that the evil really does exist. Okay, and when we say that, that means we're saying that it's objective. We're saying that it actually exists in the world. It's something that actually is part of the furniture in the world. So what I bring to the skeptic that says something such as that, like this is evil, that is evil, because it's easy for them to say that. They say that all the time. This thing in the Bible is evil. This is evil. This is evil. This is evil. So I want them to explain to me how that can be. Okay. So because if I were to say there's a tree in my yard, I can show how that can be. Like there's this tree has physical properties and it exists in this location in space. Okay. So that can make sense. If I say that something like this printer is a big printer, right? I'm giving it a property of being big. I can explain that in terms of statistics. When I compare it to other printers and say, okay, this is the average size of a printer. This printer is big, right? So I can justify it. Okay, I can justify it in a certain way. If I say that this is red, okay, I can justify it in terms of physics. The light spectrum. I can justify it by the light wave that's producing this color. Okay, but if someone says something like this thing is evil, okay, where's the justification from an atheistic standpoint? Okay, they don't have anywhere to go. There's nowhere for them to go. The only thing that they can do is point to themselves or point to a community of people. You see what I'm saying? Like that's the difference. Like when I can, any other thing that I'm saying, I'm saying has a property of something, I can point to something to justify it. Okay, but when they say something is evil, there's nowhere for them to point. The only place they're going to point is at themselves. Okay, and that doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. What do you think of that?
I think it's very similar in the fact where, when people argue, well, I'm a good person, but I think it's almost easier to argue it from the objective evil, because evil's interesting. Like pure, true evil works in that it reflects God in its opposition. And I think people, intrinsically know what's good, but that part that intrinsically knows what's good is so reflected is when it's confronted with evil. And so evil by nature will shock what's good inside us. And I think that, a lot of times in arguing or defending the fact that there is an objective root to this, a lot of times I think it's almost easier to go down the evil route. For those that deny that evil exists have not been in the presence of evil. I think to say, well, evil things don't exist, bad things, objective bad things don't exist, have not been in the world enough to know or to have seen them.
Or they're lying. I think a lot of them are lying when they say that. Like, no, there's no objective evil, and I really don't believe them. I think that they're lying. When I say that, I don't think they really believe that.
So you're saying that the premise, they're lying to themselves about the premise. Correct. That they believe. Okay.
I don't think they really, truly that they think that there's no objective evil. Like, I don't. Now, to your point, what you just said, I think that sin has stained the consciousness, our conscience, as humans. I do think that there's, like, you can be in the presence of some types of evil and totally not be aware of it. Like, I'm gonna give you a perfect example, like abortion in America. Like, there are some people that don't see that as evil. Okay, I mean, they could be right. It blows my mind that some people can really see it and not think anything bad about it. So I think that, to some degree, sin has marred us a little bit. But I agree that if it's really, 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 really evil, I think that most people would acknowledge that it is evil.
There is have you read the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis?
Yes.
Yes. I don't remember what chapter it is, but you have, for those that are listening that don't know what Screwtape Letters is, it is essentially an instruction manual from a demon to his apprentice of how to manipulate humans or mankind into doing the will of Satan, and it's written very comically. There is Screwtape, which is the head demon, and is talking to his apprentice, which is named Wormwood. And there's one chapter in there where Screwtape is talking to Wormwood about how to make sure that humans don't see the full side of evil, because that in doing so, that reflection would turn them to God. And so that there's this almost bubble that, demonic nature will try to keep humans in, or people in, that not seem too evil, where, they present, abortions instead of killing babies. They'll say, well, it's their choice. And, and a lot of, they'll mask a lot of names for what these evil things are, but to kind of hide the true form of evil and not to make it so obvious, because people, in response to seeing what is truly evil, will admit that there is an objective evil and therefore must be an objective good. So that is a tactic that is used to kind of keep us in the safe bubble, so that we don't go too far right and then therefore see the far left. And not in a political sense.
Right. No, I'm saying, yeah, it's interesting that you brought that book up. I read it like probably 10 years ago, so I don't remember all the details. But yeah, I like the fact that you're like, you remember what do you say, Wormwood? Is that his name?
My dear Wormwood.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, it is a Wormwood. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. It's been a while. Yeah, I like a lot. I read some of his autobiography. He has an interesting story.
Oh my gosh.
Did you know he used to be an atheist?
I do, and he met Tolkien at a writers' club, and
Was it Oxford College? I think that's what it was.
I don't remember the exact one, but they did meet at a writers club and they were sharing stories, ideas, and there was a point where Tolkien actually makes fun of C.S. Lewis for having a Jesus lion because he thought it was too obvious. He was like, really, like a Jesus lion? And I believe that Tolkien had a big influence on C.S. Lewis conforming to Christianity. And you see a lot of influence in each other's
And they're writing.
stories. And
Right.
uh-huh.
Yeah, they're both great writers too.
Yeah, it's incredible. So it's big fan, big fan.
All right. Well, I guess we're gonna wrap it up. We kind of touched on all the points that I had. Oh yeah, last thing. I'm sorry. There's So I did want to talk a little bit about some biblical topics that I hear skeptics talk about. So
Absolutely.
right. So and I wanted to start at the fact that they totally disregard objective reality. I'm sorry, objective morality. And so now when they come to point things at the Bible, they don't really have a leg to stand on. But even though they don't have a leg to stand on, I think that it's always a good thing to answer some of their concerns anyway.
They still try, they still try to nitpick.
Right. So the first thing I want to just, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because I actually do have a couple of videos on the channel that deals with some of this, and so we're not gonna spend a lot of time on it. But first thing is genocide. So they point to genocide in the Bible, and I think that first of all, I want to say that it's valid that they have a concern about it, okay? But I think that the concern may be due to not studying enough, not studying the scriptures enough, not studying history enough. Because one of the things that the ancients did when in their writings, and this is across the ancient Near East, they all did it. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Babylon. They all practice hyperbole, okay? Particularly when they went to war with each other, okay? They would always use hyperbole. They would always exaggerate. And the thing about it is, I don't even think that it stays in their culture, because we do it in our culture as well. When we play video games, we'll say, I killed them. I smoked them. I annihilated them. I totally destroyed them, in this video game. Totally destroyed them. We do it in sports. We probably don't do it in war as much, just because war hurts so much, and it's kind of like maybe you lost some loved ones, and so you don't really brag about it so much. But in those days, they did brag about it. Like if you look at the Moneta Stela, when Egypt crossed paths with Israel, they says, we've destroyed Israel. Israel is no more. Like they said that Israel is no more. So at a high level, that sounds like genocide. It sounds like the Egyptians committed genocide against the Israelites. Okay. But they didn't. Okay. It was just, bragging. They were just bragging that they won a battle. The Hittites, they went up against Egypt. They did the same thing. We destroyed the Egyptians, the Babylonians. And I'm not listing the wars. I actually have, I don't have my slides to show, the exact examples, and I could pull them up, but like I said, I have a video on the channel about this. But it goes on and on. Different civilizations, on and on and on. They're talking about each other, saying, "Yeah, we we destroyed this foe, we destroyed that foe, we didn't leave anyone standing. I think it was the Battle of Carchemish, where it was Egyptian against the Babylonians. With actually, I think it was, I can't remember if it was with King Nebuchadnezzar or if it was his dad. I think it was King Nebuchadnezzar, and they had the battle. No, actually, it was before King Nebuchadnezzar was the king. They had a battle, and the Babylonians said that they didn't leave any Egyptian. There was no man to run home. Okay, and so the biblical writers did the same exact thing. When they talk about the king, we destroyed them, we didn't leave anyone left. Okay, it's kind of like, literature, or any, just kind of like popular culture, where we kind of use the same lingo we use no matter what country you're in. You have a McDonald's here or there, right? And they'll talk about whatever's in popular culture. They're not like us. Like you have these songs and you have these different phrases that people use. They did the same thing in those days. Okay, and so when you look at the actual biblical text, it makes it very clear that that's what they're doing, that they're using hyperbole, because at the next chapter, they will say the opposite. Like, yeah, we didn't really take them out. They would. Now, a skeptic would look at that and say, oh, that's a contradiction. No, it's not a contradiction. What it is that they're showing you that it was hyperbole. Okay, that they were just talking big. And if you look in the prophets, like in the books of Isaiah, books of Jeremiah, or the books of Ezekiel, the prophets are saying the same thing to Israel. Okay, God says that He will destroy you. Okay, to the people of God. He's saying that He's going to punish them. Okay, it's just talking using hyperbole. Okay, and so it's the same thing in the first book of Samuel, when you talk about the Amalekites. It's the same exact thing. We destroyed them. We didn't leave anyone left. But in a couple of chapters later, the Amalekites were back on the scene. Okay, and the reason is because they were using hyperbole. Okay, so any of these when they talk about the genocide in the Bible, okay, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because they're really not informed in the ancient Near East literature. Okay, because like I said, all of the civilizations use this sort of language, and it wasn't literal. Okay, it wasn't literal. Now, one of the things that I hear from skeptics, but I also hear from Christians, is they all, everybody jumps on the fundamentalists. Okay, every camp, they jump on the younger Earth creationists and the fundamentalists, because they take everything literal in the Bible. Talking about the fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists. Everybody.
Hebrew poetry is a huge thing. They don't understand that.
Say that one more time.
Said the genre of Hebrew poetry is huge in the Bible, and I don't think a lot of people realize what that actually is or what it was meant to be. And it was not meant to be scientific.
Right. So here's the thing. So everybody jumps on the fundamentalists who take everything literally, but then the skeptic, they do the same thing. They take it literal when in reality it's not talking literally. It's talking hyperbolically. Okay, so another point is the flood. Okay, now from a Christian, let me just say this to start it off. Like, Christianity is not monolithic, okay, and so everybody doesn't hold the same positions on non-essential things like the flood and some of those other things. Some people think of a literal global flood. Some people don't. I'm not here to argue either side of that. Okay, you have scientists on either side that will say one thing or another thing. Okay, my point is that the skeptic will say, well, this is bad from a point of view of God, whether it's local, regional, whether it's a global flood, whatever. They don't think that it's good. They think that it's evil, right? They think that it's evil somehow. I don't know if they mean objective evil or what they mean by that, but why would God do that? Um, if God's creator of all people, he can. And I also explain it like this: like, first of all, from a Christian worldview standpoint, we believe that there's a heaven. We believe that God takes people, when they die, he takes them to be with him. And so if someone passes away on this earth and like particularly children, people who are innocent or, little babies or whatever, they're going straight to heaven. Okay. If they die, God is taking them straight to heaven. Probably no pain, probably no suffering. Okay. And so from that standpoint, I kind of take those kind of arguments with a grain of salt. Okay. Because I'm saying, first of all, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you finish, please.
Yeah, first of all, God could do whatever he wants to do. Okay. Not every action of God exemplifies any moral properties. Okay. This is what some people, they misunderstand. They think that every single thing that God does has moral implications. In other words, that every action that God does exemplifies some moral property. Like what I talked about all of these little letter properties. Okay, that's not the case. Everything that I do, like let's say for instance, if I do a mathematical equation, that is not exemplifying any moral property. Okay, and so every action God does doesn't necessarily exemplify a moral property. They for some reason people think that every action God does is either moral or immoral. Okay, but that's not true. And then second, if someone makes that point of view, they make that point, they need to justify it. Okay.
You bring up two really interesting points, and I think the first one with that everything God does has to have a moral implication can honestly be summed back to the Euthyphro dilemma, where God is good. And so when you elevate morality or quote unquote goodness or good with a big G to God, and when you're saying God's not acting moral, you're essentially saying, well, God's not being God. Well, yes, he is. Everything that derives from the source of good is going to be good. It doesn't mean it's going to be nice in our standards. It doesn't mean that we're not going to disagree with it, but it's going to be good because it is God himself that is doing that action. And, thinking back to the flood, a lot of people will use the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill, and well, God's killing and he's violating his own commandments and it's a contradiction. And, that the 10 commandments for thou shalt not kill is actually more accurately translated to thou shalt not destroy. And it has implications that is above just the ending of human life, because there are justifications in which we should end human life. And so I would argue that death itself is not bad, or is not evil. Like death itself, like dying, even though it may be inconvenient for us, or if we don't want to and it goes against what we want, death itself is not evil. All right? He who creates life has the authority to take it away. All right, and it is not. There's nothing evil about that. I'm not going to argue with the one who created and designed me of when my time should be to leave the planet. That's up to him, and that it's going to be good regardless of how short or how long that I'm going to live. What is evil, though, is in the manner of which we take in our own hands to end life. There are, like I said, there's justifications for ending life and self-preservation. There's higher morals. There's a hierarchy of morals. Preservation of yourself if someone is trying to attempt to harm you. Death row, and that kind of varies. But if someone is a harm to a population or will harm others, then again, that preservation of human life is you have a moral obligation to protect human life than you do someone who's more than likely going to destroy again. And so I guess just questioning people, well, is death bad? Like, do you consider death evil? And then just kind of going to that, and then also just making known that, the Bible is not contradicting. When it says thou shalt not kill, it's not, there's plenty of killing in the Bible.
Right.
But it's not evil, and that's not what that verse translates to. So I think, clarifying that up, and, the term destroy in Hebrew has so many implications. It could even mean destroy with words,
Right.
destroy someone's livelihood. There's so many ways that you could destroy that is apart from taking life. And, you can destroy and end human life. And I think that would be best summed up as to, murdering innocence or taking the life of an innocence would count as destruction as well. But that term is so broad, and it has so much deeper implications than just ending life, and just understanding that he who creates life has the authority to end it, and it is not going to be evil in any sort or means.
It's very good stuff. Thank you so much for coming on. This
Thank
has been a pleasure. Totally. I think that that we hit all of our points. I thought you did wonderful.
Thank you.
And
I thought you organized it very well.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed it a lot.